Oh, is it a woman because we're not likely to argue with her if it's a woman? I don't know. So I want to actually start by asking you what your worries are, what your concerns are, why you wanted to take an hour out of your morning, so for some of you, very early morning, to think about this. Um, and kind of what is it about this topic that pulled you out of bed or away from your coffee or wherever?
And I
Um,
want to I want to preface Betsy's question with just a little background, which is that on the J-Teen conference that we just had, Betsy presented about some emotional well-being and being really honest with our emotions, and especially after a year of trauma. It sparked this interest in me to wonder, how do we take this amazing wisdom? And I hope Betsy gives us a little bit more of a rundown about what she spoke about for anybody who was not there. And maybe we need to do an assessment of like who didn't get to hear that information so that we can all be on the same page. How do we turn that delicious wisdom of nurturing our authentic emotions and self-care into a conversation or maybe an activity or a dialogue with our teens? Just as a background, I sent her a message and I said, how do we make that applicable to our teens today? And that's how this ends up becoming just like more of a brainstorm opportunity for us. So I want to go back to her question so that we can kind of get that in the space. But to know that what she had presented felt like a desire to translate that into the room with teens. So just wanted to kind of put that in the room as well.
Thank you, Aviva.
Yeah.
So, what are you concerned about? What are you thinking about? Why are you here? What is it that you're wondering about when you think about opening day? And anybody shout out or ask Erica for permission.
Erica will start, so we'll get everyone's juices flowing. Like for me, I don't want to do it wrong. I'm someone like I'm not a mushy gushy squishy person. Like I did fine during this time. I'm in Florida, so we've been out and about, and so for me, it's just like okay, like we can all move on, just like I can move on. And I don't want to like I want to acknowledge that that is potentially dangerous or detrimental because other people clearly need different things than I need. So I really benefit from hearing what others need and hearing sort of how to be more thoughtful about it so I don't mess it up. I don't miss the opportunity that you know, that I may easily let go by.
Great, great. Other people.
So we
I'm.
have, yeah,
You
yeah,
want to? You
yeah,
go
I'll
ahead.
read. Michelle says, the mix of emotions coming into our space. Some teens will be so excited to be in person, while others will be anxious. How do we create a space that will allow both groups to feel safe?
So
I see
Michelle.
some nodding too, which I think is speaking to a lot of our concerns. Yeah.
So just a little interesting tidbit. The physiological experience of excitement and anxiety, and I'm not talking about anxiety disorders. I'm just talking about like anxiety, is identical. The physiological experience of those two things is identical. So when you get on a roller coaster, you say, "This is so much fun." And you feel it as excitement. And when I get on a roller coaster, the exact same physiological experience is, "I fucking hate this. It's too scary for me." And so part of this is in the labeling. And it's actually really important for us to understand how impactful the labeling is. That the way I describe it to myself actually changes the way I experience it, even if the physiological experience is identical. So understand that some people are going to be excited and some people are going to be anxious, and there won't be a hell of a lot of body difference in those experiences, which should also tell us that sometimes those people who are excited are also going to be anxious, and sometimes those people who are anxious are also going to be excited. And that to some degree, particularly with adolescents, the label that I put on it is going to may very well be a reflection of the label you put on it. So that if Aviva and I come into the space together and at the same moment she is anxious and I'm excited, I could switch my excitement to anxiety and she could switch her anxiety to excitement without much happening except one or the other of us labeling what they are experiencing. It doesn't, the lines between excitement and anxiety are really, really fine, and they're mostly cognitive.
And this is actually something that we see in Torah, and it's so neat to have a science component to this, that the yirah that we talk about, having this level of fear of God, the Hebrew word is powerful because it also means beyond excited. It means also this powerful awe. So as our people stood at Mount Sinai to receive Torah, they were filled with this yirah. And there is the sameness, and I love to say, especially to my B'nai Mitzvah students, this is meeting God. That powerful emotional center is the moment of full experience of godliness in your being. So such a nice little moment of just seeing how immediately the science and Torah really are wrapped in one. So what was the likeness of our people and this powerful moment to our teens today?
Aviva and I have to go on the road because everything she says about Torah makes me think about what I know about psychology, and it evidently goes the other direction as well. So I think actually one of the questions is, how do we help people label what side of the fence they're actually sitting on, and why do I have to pick one side of the fence? One of the things I've done with kids with some frequency is talk to them about how I know what I'm feeling in my body. So if I say I'm really happy, how do I know that? What are the body cues that I get? Because that actually, what it does is it takes it out. As soon as I give you words and label things, they take them out of my lizard brain. Tell me if the lizard brain makes sense to you. Nod your head if you know what I'm talking about. No. Okay, Jody, I'm going to go back for just a second and explain it. That my brain is more primitive in the back and more sophisticated in the front. And this is the back of my brain is much more reactive. It is much more negatively reactive because fear is actually something that we are bred for. Sensitivity to danger is something that we are bred for. That makes sense when you think about natural selection. People who were more cautious were more likely to reproduce. People who were less cautious were more likely to get what there used to be these books called the Darwin Awards for. I like the actual lizard. There used to be these books called the Darwin Awards that were about the stupid ways in which people unintentionally died. Sitting on the edge of a cliff, and where it says "Do not sit on the cliff," so they could take a picture of themselves. And those are called the Darwin Awards. My son, when he was an adolescent, thought they were marvelous. So fear is happening here, and it doesn't have words. It is reactive, and we are very responsive to it. Thinking is happening here, and when I start to describe an emotion to myself, I'm actually taking the experience from here to here, to a cognitive place. And when I'm doing something cognitive with my feelings, I actually have more mastery. We know that named negative feelings diminish and named positive feelings grow. Does that make sense now, Jody? Okay. Does it make sense? Are there questions about that? I don't want to leave that hanging. So that in the experience of anxiety, excitement, if I can begin to teach you where it is in your body, or you can teach me where it is in your body, then you actually have the ability to recognize and process it differently. And we're then less reactive because we've put words to it. Does that make sense? Okay. Other things, so we have heard two things. I'm worried that I'm going to screw it up, I want to say to you absolutely explicitly, we are all going to screw this up. They do not give A's at working with teenagers. They do not give A's at being human. So we're all going to screw this up. Our goal is a high B, not an A. And then the second question, how to create space for lots of feelings. I think for some of our teens that a lot of the feeling stuff is going to, thank you, Susan, is going to happen at sleepaway camp. And they're going to think that they're done because they did it there. When I think that I'm done with what I'm feeling, it may very well be that I need a break from what I'm feeling. One of the things we know about experiences like the one we are currently in is that it doesn't actually ever go away. It just goes underground and it comes back up, and it goes underground and it comes back up. And that there is learning in every time it goes underground, and more learning every time it comes back up. So that I think that for some of our kids, it's going to be a real issue of entering the physical spaces that they were in before. For us to be cognizant that so much of what we considered, pro-social behavior, like celebrating with people and comforting people and sharing things, have been lethal for a year. And that we will not give up the lethality simply because somebody tells us it's no longer lethal. And let's add to that we will have a subset of people who either by choice or by not by choice will not be protected against this vaccine. I have a very close friend who's had a kidney transplant, and she says to me explicitly, I've had a shot, I don't think I have any antibodies, because she's been on so many immunosuppressants. And she talks about the complication of watching other people's lives open up and knowing that her life cannot open up. She has no freedom there. That was a long answer to something. Other things people are concerned about.
I'm curious to know where we should find, or if we should find the balance of going back to what was versus incorporating sort of what we've done over this past year. Because I feel like from the parents that I've heard from, it's horrible, from the parents that I've heard from, there are those that are like, we have to get back to normal, we have to get back to what it was. And I feel like there's a lot of things that we were able to do this year, whether it was technology or I'm in South Florida, so I was able to do some outdoor programs that were slightly different than what we would have done pre-COVID, but it was, it was something new and different. And I personally don't see it just returning to what it was. I see it sort of like a combination, like take what you've learned and move ahead. But, how do we kind of get people on board to do that? And is that what we should be doing, or should we be focusing on just returning to normal? Like, where's the balance in that? And is that something that I'm either overthinking about, or is it like justified that, yeah, I should be thinking about that?
So It's a great question. And I think that the struggle that you're dealing with there is not about what should you do, but about whose complaints you should listen to. And that's a really different question. And it's a question that I think will undermine, if you focus on that latter question, it'll undermine your educational approaches. So remember that you have expertise, and that your expertise is in many ways more important than their denial. So that there are lots of people who want to say, let's just pretend this year never happened. I've heard that over and over and over again. To me, that's a tragedy. Because it basically means anything you learned, anything you tried, anything you experimented with is irrelevant. Nonsense. Nonsense. I think that those of us who work with teenagers spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to be professionals as opposed to people who work with teenagers. And there is a real gift to working with adolescents and emerging adults and tweens. It is different than working with 8-year-olds. Working with 8-year-olds is just so much easier. You can actually stay to the curriculum. You can teach the content. They're perfectly willing to learn content. That is no longer true when you're talking about a 14-year-old. They're not as interested in content. They're interested in self-knowledge. And the expertise that it takes to work with teens and tweens, I don't think there's anybody here who works with emerging adults, with young adults, but I think the same rule applies there. They're looking to understand how they fit in the world. Your content is the way you deliver that question. With an 8-year-old, your content is the goal. With a 16-year-old, the connection both between you and them and between them and themselves is the goal. Look, I'm a shrink. I'm not a rabbi. You should take what I say with a grain of salt. I think Pew has told this most recent Pew, and Pews are always imperfect, and we always put way too much emphasis on them. But I think this most recent Pew is telling us, oh my God, I at one point, I have to respond to what Rhonda said. At one point, my principal asked me to sub in a 4th grade classroom, and 10 minutes in, she came and said, so how's it going? And I said, don't ever ask me to do this again. I just like teenagers. I also like toddlers because they're kind of equally experimental and crazy. I think one of the things that Pew has taught us is that we're not delivering what people need. And I think that part of the issue there is that we're delivering content over connection. And particularly with adolescents, and look, if you think about what a Jewish preschool is, it's all connection with content attached. And we're really successful in preschools. And there's much that is similar in the brains of toddlers and the brains of adolescents in terms of their kind of need for emotional connection. So I think that the things that we have learned have to be, you have an opportunity and perhaps an obligation to raise your knowledge to the level of expertise. What did you learn about delivering to adolescents? And what are you going to take going forward?
Betsy, I'm going to jump in because I think this is why we're here, and that we need to begin to create spaces that help encourage normalizing our emotional awareness, and letting that be language in our communities, and letting that be safe, especially in Jewish environments, whether it is a bowling night or it is sitting to learn the weekly parsha. that we have the skill and the language, maybe even it's because it was addressed the first night of programs, to get our kids to be aware that emotions are a living, breathing experience that they're going through, and that we should not just go back to normal. It is unfair psychologically, because what we know that these teens suffered so much being isolated from one another and not being able to sit and touch each other, which they just love to sit on each other, and and I think in a few minutes, what we could do, if you guys are game, would actually put ourselves in breakout rooms and process, what does an activity or what does an engaging program, or would it be a class, what is it that you would like to create for your community, where this emotional awareness and openness to our true selves can be engaged with our teens.
I love that idea. I want to make two comments before we do that. And then, Erica, if you would just randomly stick us in breakout rooms, can you do that? Okay. I want to make two comments. One is I think that for many of us, talking about our feelings is really challenging. It feels vulnerable, it feels exposed, it feels dangerous. And then the goal is not to start there, but to begin to develop that. I don't know if I said this in the J-Teen session. I have been increasingly using the language of weather to ask people how they are, because weather actually is really easy to talk about. So if I say to you, what weather do you feel like today? And you say foggy, I know exactly what you mean. But it might take you three paragraphs to explain that to me in words. And it might make you feel like you were exposed. But foggy, overcast, sunny, windy, all of those things have meaning which we don't even have to really describe. So I'm going to suggest to you that the first thing you do when you get into your breakout groups is to exchange your weather. The other thing I want you to think about when you're thinking about opening day stuff is closing day stuff. I like the idea of planning the year to think about what I want you to walk out of the year with, more than what I want you to walk into the year with. When we write a lesson plan, for those of you who are virtuous and actually write lesson plans, you have a goal that is really explicit. This is what I want people to come out with. I want us to think about what you want your students and your staff to come out at the end of the year. So next May, what would you like them to have understood about themselves or about content? Begin with the end in mind. Think about not simply what we do on the first day, but how what we do on the first day is reflected in our goal for next May rather than next September. Was that English? Okay. For those of you who still aren't dressed, we'll put you in breakout rooms. You don't have to be dressed, but do participate in the conversation, so that your expertise is also part of what we do. Are we ready, Aviva?
Yeah, so what we're going to do is we're going to do about groups of 4, and then we'll do 12 minutes, and then we'll do a check-in and see how people are doing. You may not feel at first that you have any ideas. I know sometimes there's, oh my God, I have nothing to contribute. This is also a opportunity to create some new relationships, that you have others who are in the same boat as as we all are, to just simply have some allies who are going to be going through a similar process too. So, are people game to play along in a breakout and process and brainstorm a little bit? Awesome, great, thank you. Here we go. See you in a little while.
Erica, are you sure you want me to go into a group? Because I think I distort the nature of the group. I can't hear you. So one of the things I love about watching people's faces when they come back from Zoom is that somebody was in the middle of a word. So if you have a thought you have to finish, go right ahead. And then I think what we'd like is for you to share what you talked about. Usually it's Aviva. So, would somebody like to be the brave person who goes first and shares what you talked about? And Erica, are you okay to take some notes so that we have this in a place that people can access it later? Thank you.
So we started with the weather question,
Love
and
it.
the three of us had somewhat pessimistic weather forecasts for our future. You know, it was always like the partly cloudy or the impending rain. Like we're not there yet. We're kind of excited because maybe it'll be sunny on the other side, but we're expecting this highly anxiety producing, we don't know what. But it wasn't like torrential storms. It was like, it's gonna rain. So we all agreed that there is an anxiety level. And we just kind of talked about what our programs are. You know, Matt's starting something new, and that's exciting and scary at the same time. And just, you know, where we are and what we want to do. I don't know if we did the assignment, because I'm not sure we knew what the assignment was, but we had like a great discussion on where we are and what we hope to accomplish.
So if you think about where you want to end up, can you wrap words around that? Or should I hold that until all the groups have gone?
Sure.
Okay, I'll hold that. All right, thank you. I think that was Susan and Alana and Matt, and that's the only group that I know who the people were because Matt disappeared and needed to be put back in. So who's next? And tell us who was in your group.
I just add one thing for 2 seconds.
Yeah.
At the end of our as the time was winding down for the final minute, we actually got into a really nice conversation about the concept of settings and what classrooms, like Ilana had said that she has preschool classrooms. And so when she has sixth graders having to meet in preschool classrooms, that also, you know, it shifts the dynamic of what you're trying to do. So I thought that was also something important to think about as we're thinking is the space that you have and where you put things also makes a difference.
Absolutely. And there is a real difference between having kids at desks and having them in beanbags. Huge difference. And think about when you use what, because you can be intentional about that. Great. Thank you. Aviva, go ahead.
Yeah, so I was with Susan and Alicia and Rhoda. And the question of how do you want the year to end was fantastic because then we worked backwards. So we each shared one thing that we really felt like we want our students to have at the end. And so, for example, Alicia said she wanted them to have access to all the different community resources available. So I asked, how do you see doing that? And to which she shared, she wanted to have a series of guest lectures from those different organizations who speak on maybe it's, you know, sexuality, maybe it's disabilities, or maybe it could be on, you know, I don't know, she didn't list all of them, but you could imagine like suicide prevention or whatever it could be. But additionally, having in the community itself, really clear poster, really clear signage that has access and normalizes outreach to organizations. Susan was talking about wanting to have access to the tools when dealing with big emotions. So the question is, how do you do that? And so then we talked about one idea that I had was to maybe start as like a Havdalah event, but obviously like my kids rarely meet for Havdalah, so it would be like on my Tuesday night when we meet, and having big emotions. This is just to share like an idea, you know, program ideas listed around the room, and that the students would go towards those, and those would be big emotions: anxiety, breakdown, anger, stress.
We need positive ones too.
Well, okay, that's great. And that would be something that, Betsy, that you could offer, because in my mind, what I was looking at is how do we how do we cope? How do they deal? And what have our kids been doing that is an unhealthy response to those emotions? And what is a healthy response? And then bringing it into the community as a way of navigating those emotions and normalizing a conversation. But we also talked about that this couldn't be a one-off program. You would have to do a 4-part series, and this, or whatever, a multi-part series. This is just sharing an idea of brainstorm of how to begin to normalize some conversation. So those were some of the pieces that came up in our group. I don't know if anyone else, anything else that would like to share from that.
So I want to make 2 comments. One is make sure you have positive emotions as well. That because particularly this generation is much more focused on their unhappiness than their happiness. And so you have to have space for that. And I would also do some, how do you know when you feel that? Where does that happen in your body? Because that makes it more concrete. And one of the things, bye Jody, one of the things that I think that, and we're going to run out of time. I'm going to say this quickly. One of the things I've been thinking we should be doing is putting up big yellow stickies all in our spaces that say things like, I learned, I liked, I lost, and they should just stay up there. And as kind of witness of the story of the year. And because those things are ultimately anonymous, what you write, I learn from about myself as well. Okay, next group, because I'm scared about time. Bye, Jody.
Sure, I can share on behalf of our group. So it was me, Danielle, Jody, and Sipora. And actually, we had a really interesting conversation because Sipora has been doing things in person since October. So I had all these questions about what that was like for her as an educator and kind of how she helped facilitate connection with her students. And one of the things she reminded us, which Betsy reminded us too, is this importance of the emotional connection. So she actually did a buddy program, which I wrote down. Just as something different to do with our teens. I think you paired like younger kids with older kids, but it can certainly be within, the high school program itself. And really just thinking about every program that we have, how can we provide space for them to connect? Again, connection before content. And another thing that came up in our conversation was about reflection time, like individual reflection. It was more in context to Danielle's actually taking a group of teens to Israel in a couple of weeks that she can talk about on her own. But this idea that we also need space within ourselves to reflect on the year that we've had, but also within this Jewish context and the support that we have for our teens. So journaling, it can also be, oh yes,
That's my response to Ron.
An example for lost. Yeah. Right, it can be a Google form that gets sent to you. It can be something that also gets shared at the end of the year, kind of thinking about this begin with the end in mind and kind of reminding them where they started, kind of thing. But yeah, we had a great conversation about ways to allow our teens to connect more.
Great. And there's one more group, right, Erica? Last group. Must have had.
I don't know that we followed the prompt. I was in a group.
That is shocking to me.
I know, right? Crazy. So it was me, Aaron, and Jeremy. And one thing, we all started partly cloudy with a chance of sun. So there was some optimism. We're all in very different places geographically. I'm in Texas, they're in New York. And we talked a little bit about the things that we are doing in person versus not, a little bit about size and like what our building size will allow. And talked about the fact that we have a small group program planned now for next year, focusing on like connection over content and social, emotional, spiritual learning. And with the hope that like those small groups will not only like help in the COVID world of like keeping our people safe, but also help with everyone's emotional states. And if they want to chime in and talk a little bit about more about their experiences, that would be awesome. But yeah, we were all like different and just kind of talked instead of, following directions.
Shocking. Well, my guess is that many of us did that as well because you're important resources for each other. I mean, I think that one of the things that we have truly learned over the course of this last 16 months is that other people are what we need. So I'm looking at the clock. I know everybody's got an 11 o'clock Zoom. I want to thank Aviva for having this idea. I want to thank Erica for making it happen. I want to thank all of you for being here. And I don't know, I'm going to put my email in the chat so that if anybody wants to reach out to me, I'm sure you all have it, but I'm going to put it in here anyway.
Maybe Erica can start like a doc, a file. It could live either in Google, it could live on I don't know where the best place to do it, but it would be really special if people are starting to address these conversations in a communal programmatic way. We need to be aware of that, right? If you're going to do that emotional processing group, share with us what worked, what did you do, what did you not plan for, or whatever else. And I think if we can continue having these conversations about supporting our teens and their emotional well-being as it's linked to Torah, because this is fundamental. It's pikuach nefesh, it's shmirat haguf, right? Protecting the body and the soul. Then we can really raise emotionally aware and connected teens to continue to lead in the community. Thank you so much for this, Betsy, for your wisdom, and Erica for your facilitation and all that. So
thank you.
You're welcome. I want you guys to know this came about because Betsy and Aviva asked for it. So if there are things that you want to address, if there are conversations that you want to facilitate or put out there, just tell me. I mean, we pulled it together in a second and we got 18 people here. So let me know. This is exactly what we're here to do, is bring people together and have these conversations, both informal and formal.
And I want to go on the road with Aviva. So.
You stay after, lady.
I have another meeting.
Bye.
I gotta go. Thank you all. Thank you, Betsy. Thank you, Aviva. Thank you all. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.